Well, hello and welcome to I Love Gay today. This is kind of fun for me. We are meeting with Stephen Bourne from London. How are you, Stephen?
I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It it's so great to be here with you. You're one of those people that I have come to know in this modern world we're in, just purely through the internet and social media. And we have been connected through a variety of different social media profiles for a few years now. And it's great to be able to kind of meet face to face virtually here.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the joys of the internet, as you say, is that you can reach out around the world, around the globe, and track down people that you think might be interesting.
But yeah, I know the way we connected through all this is because over the years, you've created a few really great books, and but you kind of tie in the world of history and the LGBT community together in a way that's probably very unique, and especially because it's all focused on the two world wars that had happened. And so, but yeah, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got started with all that.
Wow, how did I get started? I'll be very honest with you. I mean, I'm always honest. I come from South London,
Yeah.
a working class background, grew up on a housing estate um, in the 60s and 70s, and left school at the age of 16 with nothing, no qualifications. There was no route to university or anything to study. So I went out to work. But I was already interested in Black British history through an adopted aunt of mine, and had already started when I was at school as a teenager. Was I use the word bunking off, but people now don't understand that term. Absconding. I have to now say absconding from school, and which was great fun. So if I wasn't going up to the West End of London to see films like The Towering Inferno or Earthquake, those are the sort of films I loved, or Diana Ross in Mahogany. I mean, I'm talking about the mid 70s. It
Yeah.
was an interesting period. Or Jaws. I was going to visit older relatives in another part of London, one of whom was my older aunt, who was a Black Londoner born
Okay.
before the First World War. So when I left school, I realized that I was already interested in that kind of history, personal history, anecdotal history, not the sort of traditional Oxford and Cambridge professor type of history. So I taught myself how to use archives like the British Library or the Imperial War Museum and so on and so forth over time. And gradually, as I got older, became aware that as a young gay man, I had a history as a gay man. I didn't know that. I mean, it was completely not discussed. I wasn't out until I was about 21, 22. And so the two areas of interest, historical subjects, has been Black British history and gay history, parallel ever since I was in my early 20s.
Wow. Yeah, because your first book, Black Poppies, and of course, for any of us that I also
Mm.
enjoy my history, and so that Poppies is very specific to World War One. But that was your first book that you came out with, correct? No?
No, it wasn't my first. No, my first book was way back in 1991, and it was a very short, modest book about my Aunt
Okay.
Esther's story. So that was published in 1991, and I did other books before Black Poppies. Black Poppies was actually in the middle of my
Okay.
career.
Okay.
Black Poppies is the one about the First World War,
Yeah.
about Black servicemen in the First World War, that really captured people's imagination because it was published at the beginning of the centenary of
Yeah.
World War One, 2014. And it took off like a rocket. Now that book was the one that I thought was going to fail. I had terrible problems with the research because so little had been written about Black soldiers and sailors in the First World War in Britain, that information that did exist conflicted. So as a historian, I was trying to unravel what is the truth here, and I wrote the book, handed it in on time. I'm not an academic, so it's very personal, and I just thought this book is going to be a disaster, and it wasn't. It took off like a rocket. Sold its first print run within a couple of weeks.
Okay.
The publisher couldn't believe it, and they said, "How did this happen?" I said, "Well, I was dragged kicking and screaming to Facebook. And for the year that I spent writing the book, I kept plugging it. Black Poppies is coming out. And people were messaging me saying, why don't you shut up about that bloody book? You know, it's like, but by the time the book was published, people had gone on Amazon and pre-ordered it. So it took off, and it's now been published as a reissue in 2019, updated with new pictures. And then more recently, I just happened to have a copy. More recently, a children's version.
Okay.
Now, Americans will love it. Believe me, I know I'm plugging my books, but Americans will love it. So do go on Amazon, and if you have any children between the ages of 8 and 12, or any age, 9 to 99, it's a lovely book. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of where it's taken me in terms of talks and reaching out to people. So that's Black Poppies, yeah.
But then you expanded out, and that's how I know I would say we reconnected over the last few years, because during Veterans Day last year, you were promoting Fighting Proud, the untold story of the gay men who served in 2 world wars. And so that's how you've really kind of made that leap and covered both wars, but with this really interesting gay perspective.
It's an interesting. Thank you for asking. It's for those who haven't seen it, it's this one, Fighting Proud, published in 2017.
Okay.
Now available on the internet from Bloomsbury. That's the plug. But this book didn't come from me. I wrote an article for a history magazine about gay men in the Second World War. This was read by an editor at a publishing house, who reached out to me, said, can we talk? So we talked, and he said, can you expand it into a book? Well, that's very unusual for an author. So of course I said yes. And I said, can I expand it to include the First World War? Because we're still in the World War I centenary period. And so the contract was drawn up, and I just went for it. And I learned so much, Matt. I really did. I knew enough to fill a book, but I needed more information. And again, you say about the internet opened up so many doors to me. And gay men, particularly in the Second World War, who I'd never heard of, writers, soldiers, you name it, a whole cross-section of experiences. And it was a real learning experience for me. And that's one of the beauties of doing books like history books, is that you, as long as you're open-minded and you learn, you can connect and learn things that you never knew about. So the book includes familiar names like Quentin Crisp and Lord Kitchener from the First World War, many familiar names, Noel Coward, of course, but it includes many stories of gay men no one had ever heard of, or who had ever linked to a wider story. And what was wonderful about Fighting Proud for me on a personal level was it wasn't all negative stories. It wasn't all doom and gloom, gay men being persecuted. That is in the book. You can't escape the truth. But what empowered me as a gay man were the stories of gay men in the 2 world wars, particularly the Second World War, who were heroes and who may not have been out in their private lives because of the law. The law in Britain decriminalized homosexuality until partially decriminalized in 1967. So the law was very strict, but gay men did survive, and some of them were known to be gay and were embraced by their straight heterosexual comrades in the army, in the navy, in the air force. Tremendous. So one of the stories I tell is that of Ian Gleed, who was an RAF, Royal Air Force hero, Battle of Britain hero. He received 2 of the highest honors the RAF officers could receive from the King George VI at Buckingham Palace. Sadly killed in action in 1943, but was quite active as a gay man in the RAF. But people turned a blind eye. Because if you were liked and respected, you could in some cases get away with it. So it was a wonderful book to do from that perspective.
What's really interesting too, from the American, the U.S. Side of, or angled from all that, that's also kind of one of those stories that I've only been discovering recently, that San Francisco and why it became a gay mecca. It really, from what I understand, it really unfolded from World War II and all the soldiers that were going out to the Pacific Theater, that they ended up that kind of getting together in the way they did all throughout the West Coast, and especially San Francisco. So after the war was over, San Francisco's just kind of organically, by accident, became this mecca that it is what it
And they
is today.
weren't necessarily gay or identified as gay. There were men who were out for a good time before going into battle and
Yeah,
possibly
yeah,
losing their lives. The shadow of or the cloud, if you like, of possible death on the battlefields or at sea or Pearl Harbor or wherever it may have been,
yeah.
it was always there. But men, not gay men, but men in general, whatever their sexuality, um, liberated themselves from the constraints that they were brought up with, and just played the field. And that happened in London. It happened in Britain as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a sense of freedom because, and even in London, you see, your country wasn't bombed. Apart from Pearl Harbor, your country wasn't bombed, but our country was. London was blitzed from September 1940 to May 1941. Intensive bombing. So people just lived for the hour, and sometimes that meant same-sex relationships and encounters, and who can blame them?
Yeah,
It didn't necessarily mean they were gay or lesbian, but that they just had that sense of almost like liberation, but under this threat of death.
perhaps the fluidity of sexuality is not such a new concept after all.
It's not, of course, it absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. But you've done so much more. It's interesting. We're talking so much about both world wars, but I love the fact that you also kind of dive into the world of entertainment and theater and so forth. And you have Playing Gay in the Golden Age of British TV under your belt as well. Oh no, you have that one too, don't you? I love it.
Well, they just happen to be on my table by the laptop, but they're sort of, the writing's back to front on my screen. I hope it's not back to front on yours.
No,
That was a lovely one. That was actually, although I don't come from an academic background, in 1999, out of the blue, I was offered 3-year bursary to go to university and do a master's. And I don't even come from an academic background, and I sort of thought, well, 3 years funding. But they thought I was going to choose a Black history subject. And when I turned around and said, no, I want to do a master's on gay men in British television, they were like, what? Were there any? Larry Grayson? I mean, you probably won't know who that was, but it was very narrow. And I said, no, it's a huge subject. So I did it. And I was awarded a Master of Philosophy degree with this thesis on gay men in British television in 2006, but could not get a publisher. No publisher would touch it. Not interested. And then out of the blue, my publisher, the History Press, who published The Black Poppies and several other of my books, asked me if I had any proposals. And I said, well, there's this master's, that's sitting on the shelf collecting dust, and they commissioned it. And that again is a very interesting subject, because I know it's been covered in depth in America by a very good friend of mine called Stephen Bourne, who wrote a book about gays and lesbian representation in American television. So his book is worth, but he'd done that long before my book came about. But again, it's not, what I wanted to do was demonstrate that it wasn't all negative. It wasn't all about stereotypes and homophobia. There was some really cutting edge, interesting television work done in Britain, particularly in the 1960s, and people didn't expect that.
I mean, it's a huge part of what has brought us to where we're at today, which folks talk about, just being visible and for other people to just realize that we're I think in this country, when Will and Grace came out on television, I think all of a sudden people realize, wow, they're not so different. They're just as dysfunctional and crazy as we are. And I think that helped propel things forward.
I ought to warn you that I ended the book in 1989. I couldn't bring it up to date because I'm actually not as interested in the representation of LGBT people in British television post 1999, but I actually took the book up to sort of 1989. The rationale for that is in the book, but people will have to read it to find out why. Because I found the early formative years more interesting. than the sort of last 20, 25 years.
Yeah, no, but a lot has,
Although progress has been made. I mean, I'm not saying progress hasn't been made, but if it's in black and white, I love it. I mean, if it's in black and white, and early British television was all in black and white, as were films before Technicolor was invented.
before Queer as Folk came about, and then
Yeah,
recently,
absolutely.
it's a sin that goes back to the history in the
Well,
70s and
can I
80s.
just say, if you look carefully, Russell T Davies, who created Queer as Folk and It's a Sin, a masterpiece. Russell T Davies, he's a huge fan of my work. Never met him, I would love to meet him, but he's busy doing his television work, putting stuff out there. But yeah, I mean, It's a Sin was breathtaking. I mean, heartbreaking, but breathtaking piece of drama.
The one today is Fellow Traveler, which is I don't know if you have it in the UK, but it's on Hulu. And oh no, I'm sorry, it's not on Hulu. It's on Paramount Plus, which is just another one of those Hulu type networks. But it really stars Matt Bomer, and it really gets into the history of gay men and lesbian women kind of separately living during the McCarthy era in the 50s here in the United
Oh,
States.
really?
Yeah, so it's really
Well, I have
fascinating.
heard of it. I can't access Paramount Plus. I haven't got a clue what a hula is. What's a hula?
Hulu, it's like Netflix. It's you have Netflix, Amazon
Oh, is it?
Prime. It's where all the kids are going nowadays to watch TV.
I'm a bit backward in terms of keeping up with all of this. It's just hard to keep up with all these channels. And, you know, when I was a child in the 60s, we only had 3 channels.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
No,
mean, 3 channels on British television. It was like so much simpler.
I know it was the same as for a kid growing up in the 70s as well. So
And the 70s, yeah.
yeah, I
But our
feel you.
fourth channel didn't come until 1982.
Yeah.
And then now you look back and you think, wow. And you had to physically get up from the couch, sofa, to switch over. You didn't have remote. Anyway, I'm going back in time, but it's all fun. It's all part of the fun.
I love it. No, I think what you're doing is amazing, and I'm really glad to, like I said, to be connected with you already online, and having this just adds all to it. And I'm just really glad you were able to take a few moments of your time and kind of
Can I
share a bit
just
of your story. Yeah, absolutely.
say one more thing? It is a bit of a bugbear for me because I haven't been able to make the LGBT plus community understand that some of my Black British history books have gay people in them.
Yeah.
So another big plug is Deep Are the Roots, Trailblazers Who Changed Black British Theatre. That was shortlisted last year for the Society for Theatre Research Award, which I'm very proud of. But it does include a couple of gay men, including Berto Pasuka, who was a Jamaican ballet dancer who created the first Black British ballet company in 1944, and also one of your greatest actors, Gordon Heath, who was an African American Shakespearean actor, who was in a relationship with another man, but found that when they came to England and Paris especially, the climate, well, Paris was more welcoming to them. So they based themselves in Paris. But Gordon was an extraordinary actor, played Othello on British television in 1955 and a range of other roles. So I've had to struggle to get the LGBT community in bookshops to, I mean, it's not a gay history book as such, but it has gay people in it. And people need to understand that most of my Black British history books also have queer people in them too. So I thought I'd show that out.
Well, hopefully, hopefully they're watching this. But in addition, I'm going to include that because I did see that information from your website, so I'm going to include that in the
Thank
description
you.
here as well. But mostly, I'm just glad, like I said, that we connected, and I look forward to maybe even meeting. I travel a lot, so maybe we might have a
Do
chance to
you?
meet in the real world.
Absolutely. Just let me know next time
Yeah,
you're in London.
I would love that. But thanks so much.
I'll buy you a cup of tea and a biscuit.
I would love it. But thanks so much for being here.
So good.